Greetings. Welcome to the DragonCon Urban Fantasy Track author interview series, where I am joined this evening with great friend and longtime supporter of the track, Eric Asher. And I have a bunch of questions for Eric, and I know he's up to the task to answer them. So we'll go ahead and get started. If anyone who is watching decides to pitch in with some questions of their own, we will keep an eye on those as well. Now, every single person that I have interviewed for this author interview series, my first question to them is always, did you read any kind of science fiction or fantasy as a child, or young adult, whichever? Did you start out at that age?
I did. As a matter of fact. And first off, thanks for having me here.
Oh,
Always.
you're very welcome. Thank you for being here.
Yeah. And I did. I read quite a bit of sci-fi and fantasy when I was a kid. Some of the earliest things I remember, especially Robert Asprin's Myth Adventures. It was like Myth Incorporated and Hit or Myth and all that. Like, I absolutely loved them. I also read The Hobbit, of course. And then I really got into Melanie Rawn's Dragon Prince trilogy and her Sunrunner's Fire. I really loved those dragon stories. I think the one that really just kind of set me on the course, though, was Black Sun Rising by C.S. Friedman, which was the start of her Coldfire trilogy. And I absolutely loved it. Totally sucked me in, and I could never put it down.
Oh, well, there you go. Those are the kinds of things that authors like to hear, that other authors like to hear as well. Now, with that kind of fantasy background, what was the impetus that kind of set you on the path to saying, okay, urban fantasy is the way I'm going to go when you began writing? Or you may have written other things first that I don't know about, but that's how most people know you, is through urban fantasy initially. So
We don't talk about the things that I wrote before that.
okay.
They're in a drawer and will never see the light of day.
From what I understand, all writers have those. So yeah.
There is one of them that kind of stuck with me. It's like this big space opera that I wrote before I ever started Vesik. I do think I might revisit that one day, but yeah. Let's just say Vesik was the first thing I ever wrote.
Okay, there you go.
So what really got me into urban fantasy was actually my uncle. He was a librarian before he retired, and he would, a lot of times he would give me gifts of like books that he'd read, thought I might enjoy, and that eventually led to him giving me some of the early Laurel K. Hamilton titles, some of the early Dresden titles, and Anton Strout and a couple others. And I was hooked on urban fantasy after that. So it just kind of spiraled off of that. So.
And you gotta love those librarians, which I say as a former one myself. So yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome though. That and you said this was your uncle?
Yes.
Okay, great, good for him. Now, if you were going to describe the Vesik series to someone who hasn't read it yet, that just happened to stumble across this interview and say, "Oh, I'd like to find out what those books are about," what's your elevator pitch for the Vesik series?
I'm gonna completely draw a blank on my elevator pitch now.
Okay. I'm sorry.
No. Get that down. It's about a necromancer and his vampire sister, and what happens when she convinces him to sabotage her ex-boyfriend's wedding, and it does not go well.
Yeah. It kind of goes both uphill and downhill from that point. So yeah, depending upon which part of which book you're in. One of the things that I find fascinating about the series is the variety of supernatural beings and creatures that you have within it. And I can't remember specifically which book it was, but when I was reading it, it was when the group all started to work together really as a cohesive unit for the first time. And I say cohesive unit, meaning that term loosely, because the desire is cohesive. The structure sometimes, you know, um, it sometimes doesn't work out the way that the desire does.
Yeah.
So, right, it doesn't necessarily follow that same path. But why do you feel that you chose to kind of populate the series with that kind of a variety, and how, you know I mean, have you ever taken count? I should know, but I mean, how many actual different supernatural species or whatever that you have within the series?
I haven't. That would probably be a very interesting count. And I'm sure if my editor's watching this, she's probably rolling her eyes right now.
Right.
But but yeah, it's one of those things that I always enjoyed a lot of folk tales, and especially Missouri.
Mm.
And I found with Missouri folk tales, you have a lot of stories that have a lot of points that intersect. So there's lots of folk tales from different cultures inside of the state, but a lot of them have similar creatures, which I always thought was really, really interesting. So I like the idea of taking some form of those stories and including those creatures, kind of with my own spin on them.
Right.
But um, jumping off of Vesik and actually over to my Mason Dixon stuff, Momo is the Missouri monster, who's a really well-known legend in Missouri. And I really wanted to do something with him and kind of bring him into an urban fantasy type setting. And well, I don't want to spoil too much, but yeah, there's some things that I'm planning to do like that with Vesik as well. But other fairy tales and mythologies that have really influenced that, especially Irish and Celtic lore,
Hmm.
Gregory and Yeats and writings like that, where these authors went out and collected folk tales from the local people and then assembled them into large volumes. Like I love reading those; they're fantastic.
You said, I think I'm just going to put them all in here. But the thing is, they all fit. They all make sense, and it's always fun to me to say, okay, what's going to be happening? Who's going to pop up next? Not, is not. It's not only individual characters that you expect might return at some point, but it's like, is there going to be a new, uh, supernatural race we haven't seen yet? And you do a lovely job of always living up to that surprise. So thank
Thank,
you.
thank you.
You're very welcome. Um, to talk about Damien himself a bit here, which of his personality traits do you feel that make it both easier and more difficult for him to accomplish whatever his task that might be, whatever it is that he's trying to do? There's some kind of a trait that makes it harder for him to get that done, and something that makes it easier.
I think as far as harder, and this also partially depends on where you look at the series and what stage you're at in his character development. But especially probably the first half of the series, one of his big hindrances is he is trying so hard not to go down a dark path that so many in the magical community assume he will simply because he is a necromancer. So he has like his core of friends and family that believe in him and don't think he ever will. And they're kind of like, oh, Lord, he's complaining about this again. But at the same time, he is trying so hard not to go down that path because, like, even his mentor Zola, like her ex-love went down that path in a really bad way. And that's kind of the story that really fills the first four books. And it's something that he realizes he has a lot of traits in common with that, kind of a willing to do things that are maybe a little outside of the accepted norm to accomplish a goal. And every time he takes a step in that direction, it unsettles him as to whether or not he's getting closer to kind of losing himself to that.
Right. It's like, if I go too far, then have I gone too far? Yeah.
Yeah. As far as what benefits him, I'd probably have to say the concern about his path is offset by perhaps a bit too much optimism about the potential outcome of his decisions. So he'll make a plan and go into something thinking this will turn out great. Yeah.
Doesn't always work that way. Yeah. And the thing is, he's always got a number of people, looking over his shoulder to tell him whether it's going to work or not. And they seem to be kind of, they seem to be basically divided on the issues too. So it's not as though he gets, everybody else telling him one thing and he's saying something else. So he definitely ends up having to figure it out for himself. That's for sure. Now, at one point, you decided to, after I think it was book 7 or 8, maybe, you came up with your 12 separate novellas
Yes.
that are told from the perspective of different characters within the series, and that's made it very, the whole thing's very different, and there's a specific reason why you had to do that.
Yes.
But I'm kind of curious about the genesis of that whole idea, and how you came upon, this is what I want to do and this is how I'm going to pull it off, and just what the experience of doing that was like for you.
Yeah. So I've always enjoyed writing shorter fiction. My steampunk series, Steamborn, a lot of folks don't know that was originally written as 12 novellas. After doing market research and whatnot, I realized that releasing those as novellas was probably not going to be the best approach, just due to percentage and distribution and things like that. The boring business side of things. But
Right.
I wrote it in that kind of episodic novella form. And as you're reading them, a lot of people have commented like, hey, this novel feels like it has 3 separate parts. And I'm like, yeah, it's because it does.
That's because it did, yeah.
And I enjoyed that so much, though, that when I realized what I was going to do with the Vesik series and switch that point of view for a few stories, I really wanted to get in to more of that episodic writing and give people a point of view that wasn't Damien's. So we learn more about the world, like especially when you can see things through Vicky's eyes more. You get her view of the fairies that they're fighting with, which is quite a bit different of how Damien looks at people. And of course, Nixie, you get some of her history in Atlantis and the uprising that's going on there down in the Caribbean. So I really like being able to expand what do I want to say? Not the perception, but what people can see through the character's eyes.
Right. Well, that makes sense because they're seeing the world through their own eyes, and yet it's also through the perspective of the series, and Damien factors into it, because I don't want to give too much away for anybody who hasn't gotten that far, but there is a good reason why it's being done that way, out of a necessity, actually. So, um, what would you say, like, again, without giving away too much, um, who or what is the most dangerous foe that you think that Damien has had to face?
The most dangerous that he's faced.
Mhm.
That's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, because he's on the run from something all the time.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That makes it fun. I mean,
yeah, of course.
if he doesn't have fun, then it's not as interesting a story.
Yeah, that's right. There has to be a threat of dismemberment at some point before it's can't
Yeah.
be truly exciting without it, right?
I think one of the most dangerous points for him was probably when they were actually in the Burning Lands and they had to face off with one of the archdemons there. Because she was really overpowered, and without assistance of Vicky at that point in time, who he didn't even realize had the ability to do what she did, I don't know if he would have come out on top in that fight.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good answer. Yeah.
Yeah,
Uh,
and one of those potential ripping a portal open between dimensions and bad things, and yeah.
yeah. If I do this, this will happen, or this could happen. But if I don't do it, then this thing that's 3 times worse will likely occur. So,
Yeah,
yeah, he's,
but on the page, we probably get more. We get more of the interesting subterfuge of the Fey King. I think as the story goes along, you realize how much he's been doing in the background that we haven't really had on the page because it's all from Damien's perspective. And if he's not aware of it, the reader's only vaguely aware of it. Which was another thing that was really fun to do with the novellas, is give a little more insight into all of that.
right. So we're not seeing it just from his point of view. Now, what would you say is the one thing that Damien cares about most in the whole world? What's the most important thing to him?
Oh, the most important thing. I could cheat and say family, but but I think it would probably have to come down to, oh, it's so hard. I think for him it comes down to two people, really. It comes down to Sam, his sister, and it comes down to Nixie, his partner. And those two are, yeah, it's kind of his whole world circles around them.
Right. Yes. And and Sam is a very interesting character in and of herself, for sure. Now, if Damien could make a guest appearance in any other series, where would you like that to be? I mean, just a one-off thing where he came in for either the span of a chapter or an arc within a book or whatever. But what series do you think he would enjoy, or what would you enjoy seeing him do?
Uh, Anything by Patricia Briggs.
Oh, okay, all
Like
right.
Mercy, or Alpha and Omega would just be hilarious, and yeah, that would just be fun.
Yeah, I'm trying to imagine right now Damien and Charles facing each other. That would be yes, an interesting combination for sure. Now, with you've been doing the Vesik series for a while, and you've got a lot of books out in that series now. And with it going on for a while, was there anything that you did early on that later on you said, "Oh God, why did I do that?" Or I wish I hadn't done it quite that way. Is there anything like that?
So early on in the books, I was a pantser, which, if you're not familiar with the term, anyone that's watching, basically means I wrote off the cuff, whatever came to my mind. That's where the story went, and it was a lot of work in editing because obviously when you're just writing off the cuff, you write a lot of crazy stuff that has to be edited into a cohesive thing that makes it look like you were doing that one intentional storyline the whole time. I wasn't. um, but that created a lot more work than it probably needed to. But I got lucky because everything that I did in those early books, I really enjoyed how it set me up to do things in the later books and call back to even what seemed like the smallest event in the first couple books, like would spin off an entire novel down the road. So that
Right.
um, I think the biggest regret I have on those early ones was not so much the story itself, but there was like small technical things where when I was writing the first of them, I thought if there was a joke on the page, you had to show all the characters around it reacting to it, which you don't.
Right, right.
They don't have to grin that much, really. But the funny thing is like every now and then I'll get a review like that. It's like his jokes are so bad he has to make his characters laugh at him, and I'm like, yeah, that's fair.
It's terrible when when somebody's mean in a review and you have to say, yeah, well, they've got a point. So
Yeah, but it happens. It's a big learning experience, and I don't do that anymore. So hey, and we
right,
did actually cheat and go back and edit some of that out of the earlier ones.
right,
So not that that's really cheating, but it's cleaned up a little bit.
right. Well, it's kind of, you've learned a number of things as you've gone along. You've learned better probably what works for that specific series, and what just what worked better, in general. And that actually is a good kind of segue into the use of humor, which there is a fair amount of in this series. Aside from the fact that there is also lots of uh, you know violence and mayhem and some death, there is a fair amount of humor. And you've been on the track humor panels in the past, and we talk about some of this, but I think it must be a really difficult situation trying to be at a point where you don't, like, you're not banging people over the heads with something to tell them that it's funny.
Yes.
That's kind of like the reactions that you're talking about, where people start, um, you have to make all the characters laugh at the joke for other people to think it's funny. Um, and that so it's got to be kind of hard to meld that in there to make it so that it fits the situation. So how do you work on that to kind of make that all fit together?
It's a lot of balance, and that's something that was definitely learned as I went along. So I started using humor a little more deliberately to offset darker scenes, um, and even sometimes inserting into battle scenes where maybe a fight was getting really heavy, it had been going on for a while. Just a tiny little joke or pun to kind of break that tension before you really got back into it. And it's yeah, balancing it out, you really don't need to put those reactions into it. Like it's more fun to me now to put a character reacting to a joke that I think is hilarious as if it is the worst joke they have ever heard.
Yeah. Because that makes it feel more realistic in a lot of ways,
Yeah,
because not everybody thinks the same things are funny
exactly.
either.
Especially like brothers and sisters often do not have the same kind of humor. So if Damien makes a joke about vampires, Sam will probably not be amused.
Right, right, right. And because we know that there are a lot of jokes about necromancers flying around all the time. So
There are like
uh,
all
yeah.
the memes that people send me. I just love them.
Oh, that's great. That's great. I have to now. I want to see them. So I'll have to be looking for them. Yeah, I'll have to look for them on your author page. So you've mentioned the Steamborn series, and I did want you to talk about that a little bit. And what can you say? We've got people who have no idea what it's about. What would you like to uh, say about it? What's your kind of elevator pitch on the Steamborn series for people?
So Steamborn, I'll give you my clunky elevator pitch. Then I'll,
Okay.
then I'll give
Go-
you the elevator pitch that Mary Mancusi gave me that is 1,000 times better.
Oh, okay.
So my elevator pitch is that it's a reimagining of what would happen if the world ended around the Industrial Revolution and then was rebuilt on steam power, and there's giant bugs.
And there's giant bugs. Yeah.
Yeah, yes. Which that appeals to like all of my sensibilities that kind of inspired me to write that, which was if you're familiar with Miyazaki's films at all, he did Nausicaa of the Valley of the Wind, And that was one that I saw as a kid, and I always loved the giant bugs in that anime. And it just always it stuck with me that I wanted to do a story with giant bugs in it. So it kind of it took on some of that sensibility. But Mary gave me a really good pitch. She calls it a steampunk Starship Troopers. And I'm like,
Ah,
that's really short, that's really smart. Thank you. So
shout out to another friend of the track, Mary Mancusi. Yeah, and that's yeah, that's a good way of looking at it. Now, that series, you have some other news about that series.
I do. That was originally just going to be a trilogy. There was a few things that were unresolved in the first trilogy that so many people asked me about. I was like, yeah, there's enough here to do more work on this. So I started outlining it and tinkering with it, and I've really played around with it a little bit over the last 5 years. And so basically, I'm doing 2 new trilogies based in the Steamborn world. And the first book of that, Skyborn, will be out June 29th, just in a couple weeks here. So I am
Right?
very excited about that. And it introduces new characters and brings back Jacob and Alice and all the crazy bugs, and yeah.
Crazy bugs, yeah. And the thing about that series too is that the protagonist is a young adult rather than being an adult, and it's not as though all the characters are, but that your main focus was on a young adult. And does that kind of play into or I guess was that a response kind of to your feeling that you were saying you always want to do something like that when you were younger? That was
Yeah,
kind of what your
yeah,
desire was. So you're like, oh, I'll make this guy younger.
yeah. And kind of turned it into like a coming of age story. So you have
Right.
coming of age story kind of woven into the post apocalyptic feel, and I really enjoy it because it's not necessarily as heavy and dark and kind of hopeless as a lot of dystopian fiction. I really put a lot of effort into, like, yes, things are bad, but keeping that thread of light in there as much as I could, kind of balance it out.
Yeah. I think and I agree with you. I mean, as a reader, I think that you did pull that off. Giant bugs aside, that that as you said, it's like it has something to do with the tone, I guess, and the balance. It's like if you have kind of the darker side of that kind of a world, then there's always you can balance it out with people doing good things, or good people as well. And I think they're both in that series. So I think that you pulled it off very nicely.
Thank you.
Yeah,
And
welcome.
a funny anecdote about the giant bugs, because I'm sure lots of people are like, giant bugs. Um,
Yeah,
the,
including me, as I recall. But yeah.
yeah, the
Uh,
the first cover we had for that series had one of the giant bugs on it, and one of the main characters riding the giant bug. And I absolutely love the cover. It was one of my favorite things I'd ever seen. When I first put that book out, it turned people off. Just, they're like, nope, not reading that. That's in that book. I'm not touching that.
uh,
So
yeah, because I know what you're talking about. So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But we switched the cover to what it is today. And it actually, if you Google Steamborn, you'll see the original cover. But yeah, so we switched it to what it is today, and it went over much, much better.
Well, and I will say to everybody out there who has any kind of a bugophobia, I won't get specific, but that if I can read it, they can read it. Yeah, it's not the only thing. So uh, now, aside from the Steamborn series, you also have the Mason Dixon Monster Hunter
Yes.
series. And what can you tell us about that one and how that one kind of transpired? And you
So
know,
Mason, a big part of Mason is John Hartness's fault, which I know
oh well, yeah, may as well blame whatever you can on Harkness. Yeah, why not?
I that is one of my life philosophies, is blame.
That's right.
Um, but he invited me to participate in one of his Falstaff Books projects, and it sounded amazing. And the other thing that really appealed to me is I would get all the weird folk tale research I'd done on rural Missouri. I'd actually be able to use it in a book. So where some of that influenced things that were in Vesik, I actually just ripped the creatures right out of Missouri folklore and dropped them into these urban fantasy books, novellas. And that was a blast. So I went back and found like old journal articles and old books from the 40s and 50s that, much like Lady Gregory and Yeats had gathered
Mm-hmm.
tales in Ireland, uh, Vance Randolph gathered a lot of folk tales in Missouri. So I studied a lot of the stuff that he gathered up and did some internet research on just the weirdest creatures. And I'll get messages every now and then like, how did you come up with a hinge-tailed Bing buffer? And what is it? I'm like, it's literally a Missouri folk tale. Like, I know it sounds like I just completely made it up off the top of my head, but it's a really
It's
weird
out
creature.
there, yeah.
Yeah, it carries giant rocks and pouches on its neck. It's like a hippopotamus with the trunk of an elephant, and it hunts by throwing those rocks. It is so weird, but it was so fun to write. I love it.
So for a lot of these, then you were able to, incorporate them into the novellas and yet at the same time kind of expand on them, make them do things that you wanted to have them do.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that's, and how does Mason Dixon actually become a monster hunter? How does that all transpire?
So he is not. The title's a little deceptive. If it was totally accurate, it would probably be like Mason Dixon, cryptid conservationist, but
Right, yeah.
that doesn't really roll off the tongue.
Uh,
So Mason goes out and actually rescues endangered cryptids. So like if they're being hunted or they're getting too close to human populations, he'll go out and like find cryptid eggs or orphaned critters and take them to refuges that are like underground sanctuaries that are kind of off the map. And so it's all of the trouble that he gets into doing that. And on top of it, he's also a vlogger with like a YouTube channel. And he is creating videos about cryptids, about the cryptids that he's capturing. But he intentionally makes them look fake to turn people off of actually going out to hunt the creatures that he's trying to rescue. So it's a lot of fun having those different layers to it.
right, and then he does occasionally come across things that are acting monstrously. So he kind of has three jobs.
Yes, yes.
So
Occasionally he does have to actually fight them. Yeah.
now, who are some of your secondary, or maybe not even quite to the level of secondary, but recurring characters in each of your different series? Who are some of your favorites to write?
Some of my favorites to write. In Steamborn, no one's actually met this character yet, but her name's Fury, and she is actually a soldier on the opposite side of the war from Jacob and Alice that we're going to get to meet. And she is an officer, or not an officer, but she's a crewman of an enemy warship, and it is so much fun getting into like that another city like on the other side of the world. It's like we've learned all of this about Ancora and Bulwark and Beldorn and all these cities that are on one side of the world, and now we get to learn about what has often just been kind of a nebulous enemy in the background because they haven't really ever run into them. They don't know that much about them. They've only fought enemies closer to home. So it's an interesting character to work with.
Something to look forward to. Okay.
Yeah. Vesik, I have to say Luna. Luna is probably my favorite secondary character. Like she's just, and I mean, I guess maybe I should say Vicky, but like after the novellas, I feel like Vicky's a main character. It's
Right.
such a huge role. But Luna is just a riot. She's a death bat, and she's based on a I'm going to screw up the name. I believe it's a Honduran white cotton ball bat. And if you if you Google that,
Wow.
they're adorable. So I took that and turned her into one of Kamazatsu's death bats. So she's like a pint-sized, fluffy white murder machine. But she's
That's
like really, yeah, she's really peppy and always upbeat and just kills everything.
yes, and has an affinity for, was it Cheez-Its
Cheese balls.
or cheese balls? Yeah. So, uh, yeah, which is kind of funny to uh, to think of, but yes, yeah, but I like that. That's a great description of her. Now, is there one of your books that you particularly struggled with, that was more difficult to get through the writing of for whatever reason, because it was something about the story, it was, just the story was just not coming the way it was supposed to, or anything like that?
Yeah, uh seventh the seventh Vesik book was Witch Queen's War. And for some reason that was so hard to write. And like the entire time I was writing it, it was just like, this is gonna be a terrible book. This is gonna be awful. I don't know.
Oh.
And it was so weird because I got to the end of it and I reread it and I'm like, this is one of my best books. Why? I don't understand. But it did. It took almost twice as long to write as most of my other books. It was a struggle the whole way through. And it's weird because it was one of the first ones I actually worked on outlining, which may have been what it was. I was so used to getting kind of in that zone and just flow and letting the words go. And I did not mean to rhyme all that. I apologize.
The writing workshop with Eric Asher. No.
Yeah. Oh, good Lord. But yeah, it took a lot longer. But when it was all done, I was extremely happy with it. Now, there were some other books like Steam Sworn. Steam Sworn has the death of a character in it that was so hard to write. Like it was just awful. It was awful. I was like, I know it has to happen, but this is terrible. So it came out a little rough the first time, but then it edits. I think it really drives the knife home. Terrible, but I guess there you go.
Yeah, drives the knife home. Okay, let's my. Uh, Now, and then kind of the other side of that, do you have a favorite of your books? Unless it is Witch Queen's War, because it took that extra effort. But is there another one, or one from each of the series that you particularly, or you're fondest of for whatever reason?
My favorite Vesik. Oh, that's tough. I think it might actually be the Book of the Blade. It
Hmm.
was really really unique story to write. It follows two of the blood mages, which you meet Damien meets the blood mages, and we see his opinion of them through his eyes. But actually getting into their heads was really interesting and a lot of fun. And sending them into a realm where Damien couldn't really follow was a lot of fun. And getting more into the nitty gritty of their magic and how that worked was really neat to explore that. And I love how it turned out. And it is one of the sadder novellas, but I'm still to this day very happy with it.
Well, again, I think it's kind of one of those things that it's like, oh, it's got to happen. I mean, I'm sure that's part of the bittersweetness of it for you, is the fact that maybe it's sad and, gee, I didn't really want to have to do this, but I did. So yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, having read that one not that long ago myself, I can understand that, you know, that perspective.
Uh, as far as Steamborn goes, I honestly think my favorite so far is the one that's about to come out.
Oh, good.
It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun.
You like that new character a lot, don't you?
I do. Yeah, and some of the developments with Jacob and Alice are a lot of fun too. And we get to see a lot more of Jakar as well, which he's one of my favorites.
Gotcha. Sounds good. I'm sure that I know I'm looking forward to it. We'll see about other. I'm sure other people are kind of chomping at the bit. But 2 weeks from today, you said the 29th, right? So
Really close. Yeah, it is 2 weeks from today. Wow.
yeah. Now, who would you say have been some of the most influential writers on you? Throughout your life. You talked a little bit about some of the earlier ones that got you um, going. Do you feel as though there's anybody else as you were taking on the mantle yourself of becoming an author? Were there people that you kind of felt were looking over your shoulder a little bit?
Yeah. So I had a few people that I would probably consider mentors at this point that just gave me great insights into either craft or industry or marketing. One of the big ones was Angie Fox. I feel
Ah,
I feel like you know Angie.
I do.
Yeah,
Yes, she's great.
right on. Yeah, she's awesome. Several others that I'm drawing a blank on. No.
Right, right. There are a
Uh,
whole bunch of them. Carol, don't ask me now. Yeah.
yeah.
Uh,
No, we talked about Mary earlier. She gave me a lot of advice about kind of narrowing down those elevator pitches and stuff, which was amazing. John Hartness, he has really interesting insights on productivity and like setting goals and meeting goals, and so that was really nice. Stacy Rourke did a lot for. She actually still works with me today on my book descriptions. Like when you log on to a bookstore and you see the descriptions of the books, she is magical at writing those things. So she still like fixes my book descriptions to this day. She's like, "That's okay, but let's try this."
let's try this. Yeah. Let's
Yeah,
let's beef it up a little.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a ton of folks that have just they've been generous with their advice over the years, with their craft, and yeah. I mean, it's a great industry. I mean, there's so many people that are willing to help. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that that's also true within the fantasy sci-fi community. From what I've heard, anyway, that's often very true. Within that genre community. Now, for kind of a craft question, um, when you're writing, do you prefer absolute quiet, or do you like some kind of background noise, whether it's that'd be loud necessarily, but or like music or whatever? What is your preference?
Music, music.
Okay.
So, and it kind of depends on the scene as to what music. If it's a big fight scene, it can be like some pretty heavy stuff. If it's just general writing narrative and exploring characters, I really enjoy this group called Audio Machine. They do they do a lot of like soundtrack type work, and
Oh, okay.
they have some amazing albums out there that I love to listen to. But yeah, and sometimes I write via dictation. So if I'm doing dictation, I I like to have really loud music on so I can't hear myself talking.
Oh,
um,
yeah. There you go.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Uh,
and also it drowns out any potential embarrassment if I realize someone's listening to what I'm talking to myself and speaking. And
So when you do that though, if you're doing the dictation, it doesn't pick up the background sound, it just picks up what you're saying.
it's I actually have, well, I don't have them up here, but I have some noise canceling headphones that I wear, so it silences it pretty well. And then I have a very precise. Ooh, I do have this up here. I have this little guy, which is a very precise little microphone. So it's just that
Ah,
dot that clips over my ear, and it's wild how narrow a band it'll pick up. Like if it's pointed right at my mouth, it picks everything up perfectly. If I point it up in the air, it'll just be a garbled mess.
It's like every fifth word or
Yeah.
something it picks up, yeah. Which doesn't exactly serve your purpose, does it?
No, no.
Which dictation program are you using now?
I mostly use Dragon. Like I
Okay.
and I used to in another life I used to train doctors and folks on how to use Dragon, which back then it wasn't that great for fantasy words and magic spells and things like that. But with the modern training you can do on it, it's wonderful.
Okay. Now, what kinds of things do you enjoy reading for pleasure? Do you read within your own genres, or do you prefer to read other things?
I do read within my own genres, but I do not read the genre that I'm currently writing because I don't want it. I don't want anything creeping in. Like
Right.
I'm I'm fine with being inspired by something and like letting it stew for a year or two, but yeah, I don't want it creeping in and then have
Right.
some.
You don't want it to actually influence anything
Yeah, yeah.
at the time.
You don't want that email like, wow, that's a lot like so and so's. No.
Yeah, right, right. You're like, well, no, we don't want to do that. And I had that same response from someone who I can't remember off the top of my head, but it was one of the last interviews I did here that person said the same thing, that
Yeah.
they'll, you know, make sure that they're not reading in their own genre when they're writing it. So,
But
uh,
I really love listening to audiobooks.
oh,
Uh,
do you?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. So I, if it's like on an Audible daily deal, I will probably pick it up and check it out, which has led me to a lot of things that I wouldn't normally listen to. So it's a wide variety of things. But some of my favorite audiobooks, probably Kevin Hearn's Iron Druid.
Hmm.
His narrator's so good, so good. And of course, I have to come back to C.S. Friedman. Her Black Sun Rising audiobook is just as good as the book. So yeah, she's one of my favorites. And Patricia Briggs audiobooks. She has some of the best narration out there.
Oh, really? Well, that's good to hear because I'm not an audiobook person myself, but I'm very grateful that they exist because I know that for a lot of people, how important it is to be able to listen rather than, either because of some kind of, physical issue that prevents them from being able to actually read, or, there are people who drive a lot that they want this. So I think they're a wonderful tool. So I'm glad to hear that there are these good options out there. And I've got some friends who swear by audiobooks. So now we know a little bit about Steamborn, but can you tell us what else is coming up next for you? Do you have, I know there's more Vesik coming soon,
Yes.
and anything, just let us know
Yeah, yeah.
what's in the pipeline.
So I'm gonna get the date wrong. Sometime in August.
Sometime that's okay. August sometime. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, the new Vesik book will be out. It's called Dreams of the Forgotten Dead, and it is a return to the point of view that we're all so familiar with, which I won't say more than that because if you haven't read the Book of the Reaper yet, go read that.
That's right. That's right. You got to catch up, folks. You got till August. Uh,
Yes.
do a deep dive into the series and do that. So
But then,
and go ahead. I'm sorry.
oh no, no problem. Then after that, we have the next Steamborn book, the fifth Steamborn, and then a few months after that, we'll have the sixth Steamborn. So they're actually all four of those titles written already. We're just either in post production or starting the audiobooks and getting all that in order.
Now I know you were very busy um, all the way up until last month. It seemed as though for several months you were just like you had to have blinders on, and now we know why with
Yeah,
all of that going on.
yeah,
And didn't you say earlier about the Steamborn that there were actually going to be two more trilogies?
yes, yes. So
Okay.
this is the this
The
is the
second part.
trilogy, and then the third trilogy will probably be late next year. It'll start releasing if I can buckle down and ignore the world again for about 6 months.
Yeah. Well, I guess in some ways, then maybe quarantine was where that you found the silver lining, right?
the the,
Uh,
sec- the second half I was really productive. The early on though, it was just flat line.
yeah. Well, I've heard a lot of people say that. I know it was an issue for a lot of folks. So I think that it was probably that way for just people in general too. But yeah, if you're a creative, I'm sure it took a different kind of toll. So, but we're very glad that you have all these to look forward to. Now,
Thank
is the Mason Dixon stuff, is that like over, or do you think you might revisit him again at some point?
So I am actually outlining the final four Mason novellas right now.
Oh, okay.
That's the project I'm working on now. So yeah, while I'm doing my outlining, I'm trying to get my interviews and promotional things all lined up before I dive back into actually writing it all.
Right, right. Well, yeah, and then you've got the whole 2 weeks thing, and this interview will be posted. So hopefully, I should just put it out. I should have said at the very beginning, he's got a book coming out in 2 weeks. But um, we'll mention that several times. I think that's maybe the third or fourth time it's come up. So, um, lots of great stuff to look forward to, and I just really appreciate you taking the time, Eric, to sit here and answer all these questions for me. And it's been, as of course, lovely to actually see you again, even if it's
Too.
in this format. And I look forward to seeing you in person.
Yes.
And you know, uh, there will be some of these, a couple of these things we've been talking about will actually be out and about by then. So that will be great as well. And I want, in addition to thanking you, I want to thank everyone who's been watching with us tonight, everyone who will watch this later. We appreciate it very much. And just to let you know, next week on the 23rd, a night earlier than usual, we typically do Thursdays, but we're doing a Wednesday this month. We have the Supernatural Rewind for season 5, where we're going back, and each month we do one of the early Supernatural seasons, and so we'll do that. Um, number 5 is next week, season 5. Next month we'll do season 6, and then the author interview in July, Sherry Priest. So that will be a fun time as well.
I love
And
it.
yeah, it sounds like fun, doesn't it? So, Eric, thank you again so much for being here. I really, really appreciate it. And I know all of your readers will appreciate hearing more information. A lot of them probably know some of the information that you gave out, but maybe we can give them some surprises.
Thank you for having
So
me.
you're very welcome. Take care, and we will see everybody soon, we hope. Good
Thanks.
night, all.